We're live.
All right. Good evening, Wyoming. Hope everyone is doing well on this fine Sunday. So great to have you here. Coming from my studio in Cheyenne, Wyoming, also known as my kitchen, Rob. We've got a really fancy setup here, you guys. We got a few lights, and my wife is sitting there. She's looking at the text. So if you guys can't hear us, it's probably her fault or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, I am so thrilled this evening to have my good friend of 22 years, my brother from across the pond, Mr. Rob, here to join me tonight. And we are going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about the UK. We're going to talk about everything in between. Hopefully we're going to have some fun tonight. We're going to talk about, things that matter to people in Wyoming, in the United States, and beyond. We've known each other, Rob, for 22 plus years, something like that. Yeah, and I'm just going to admit in front of everybody right now, we met in a video game, didn't we? We were in our 20s, and that's what we did at that stage. We played all night and worked all day, didn't we?
Yeah, amazingly never slept, but somehow through it.
Yep. So here we are. Actually, Rob is going to be coming to Wyoming and going to be a proud Wyomingite. And so the things that we're going to talk about tonight will matter to Rob, too. With that, let's kick it off. As you all know, I am running for governor of Wyoming next year. I'm getting an early start, and it's just really, really great to be able to live stream with you guys tonight. My campaign foundation is faith, family, freedom, and the future. We're going to talk a little bit about those things tonight, Rob, as well as some of the things that matter to people in Wyoming, but not just Wyoming, but we're going to talk about some of the dichotomy of what's going on in the UK.
And how that could very much tie into what, the way things are going in America particularly.
Yeah, exactly.
Early warning signs, perhaps.
Yeah, it could be early warning signs, things like that. So with that, let's dive in. So I want to talk about faith first. So for me, faith is the foundation of my campaign. And with that, that means that everything that I'm going to do as I campaign for governor is going to be going through that filter of faith. And you, Rob, you've known me a long time. You know that I've been a person of faith, Christian faith. And we've talked a lot about that. And so with that, but also as governor, that's going to be my guiding light, my principle, which really, really drives the campaign. And I think it's a really important thing for all of us to realize is that this brings a lot of good to the world. America in particular is the most generous nation in the world, Rob.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, and it's because of our faith, I think, that we do that. The next thing is family. I think that's the most important thing. We've had such a war on family, right? I mean, tell us about what's going on in the UK and with family and kind of what you see going on there.
It seems to be like common things where you're looking at, everything where they're trying to break up the nuclear family. They've made it very, very simple now for, for families to be broken up. The social care support system, everything seems to be in place where the unity is no longer there.
Yeah, it's really anti-family, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've done that a lot in America too. Just really kind of gotten away from the nuclear family and what matters most, when it comes to that. And it's also, gotten very easy to break up that family. And of course, there's a lot of politics that's getting into that too. A lot of people just making different decisions in their lives. It's affecting the family. And of course, that goes into our education system, into our society. And we really want to support healthy families, as a second pillar of my campaign. Third thing is freedom. Without faith and without family, freedom is waning, And Rob, one of the things that I like to say, we're going to talk a lot about freedom because you're someone that can speak to really what it looks like when freedom is being, you're 10 years later than us, right?
Well, we are certainly 10 years further down the line. So
why don't you give the audience some examples of how freedoms in the UK have been infringed upon?
Oh, where do I start?
Yeah, let's start with you and I were talking about knives. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, the fact that, knives, you literally have to go through ID now, simply to buy a kitchen knife.
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds, you literally are ID.
Yeah, so here we are in Wyoming where there's more cattle than people, and there's more guns than people and cattle combined, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and you're coming from a place where you have to go through this paperwork process just to get a kitchen knife.
Right.
What are some other things that you can think of at the top of your head that were freedoms we could be headed there if we don't change where we're going as a nation.
Well, for a start, I'm probably on about a dozen watch lists now back in England just for talking to a Republican in America.
Right?
So it's going to be fun flying into the UK in a few days. I mean, if you look at the way that we are on social media, particularly, you know, we're having people pulled out of their homes at 2 o'clock in the morning simply for posting a dislike on, I believe it was a Palestinian flag of all things. You know,
right.
There was no rhetoric to it. There was nothing derogatory. It was simply a post about not liking, and this is not uncommon.
Yeah.
You know, we have seen people getting locked up now, left, right, and centre, simply for posting something on social media, which is
right.
It's getting to the point where the totalitarianism of that is getting terrifying. You know, you are literally our freedom of speech is just completely getting eradicated.
Well, it's gone, right? And you were telling me about something else the other day that affects the freedom of speech. Tell the audience about the TV tax.
Oh, well, this has been around for a long time, but yeah, obviously we pay a TV license in the UK, so about £240 a year-ish, I think it is now.
Yeah.
So that's simply to watch television. If you don't have a TV license and you're caught watching Netflix, Amazon now, I think as well, you know, or just general television, anything that's live television, you will face severe fines. Even somebody that doesn't own a television, you know, if you do not pay a TV license, they are now bombarding people and harassing people, asking them why they haven't paid the TV license.
And you pay a TV license every year. Where does that money go?
Right, it goes to fund the BBC, which essentially is basically becoming ever more, and this is where I'm definitely going to get in trouble, but, you know, it's becoming ever more of a mouthpiece for the government, and it doesn't matter who the government of the day is.
Right, so everyone in the UK is sponsoring government media, essentially, in a way, with this yearly fee that they pay on their TVs.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about freedom, you know, the third pillar of my campaign, it's really important to understand and see that we're about 10 years behind you, right? If we don't start reversing course, which we're working on doing, we can start seeing so much of this stuff. And honestly, had our presidential election gone a different way, Rob, I think we might be seeing some of this stuff even today.
I believe, to be fair, we've had conversations over the last few years about, you know, the warning signs that they're they were starting to take away certain. They do it by chipping away at individual things, and you get like a concentrated campaign against certain elements, certain topics, and ever more so, you know, you become less able to speak out against it. You know, structures are getting put in place, and as I said, we've now got to the situation where simply posting on social media and you can end up in jail, which is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. Even here in Wyoming, you know, we're a very conservative state, Rob, and we voted almost 80% of us voted for Trump in this last election. The most polarized state in that sense in the nation, where we voted so heavily for Trump. And yet our policies in this state, on the state level, don't look a lot different than some of the liberal policies that we see just south of our border.
Well, again, if you look at it, Joe, you go back 10 years ago, things that even the left would have considered to be crazy are now, you know, commonplace even on the right.
We talked about this.
You know, you can go back and look at old videos of, you know, British MPs or American leaders. And it's the same thing. You know, they would have turned around years ago and said, "No, are you crazy? That makes no sense at all." And now here we are living it. Yeah, well, you know,
in the last 10 years, Rob, or in the last 20 years, we were talking about this over this past week while you've been visiting, how even 10 years ago, Obama was saying we have an immigration problem.
Right.
You look 10, 15 years ago, you had the left, you know, Clinton and others saying we have a government size problem. You have Bill Clinton, who fired more than 300,000 government employees. That's very, you have a Democrat doing that because government was getting too big. And yet here we are going, hey, let's clean this up. And you see all of this opposition. But what it really is, Rob, is it's opposition to globalism.
Didn't Obama deport more people than any American president?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he had a very, very huge list. And yet we have all the outrage. And by the way, all the people that are being deported by the Trump administration right now are primarily people who are committing crimes, terrorists, criminals, gay members, and going, because here's what happened is Biden said, we got an open door. We're going to give you guys Social Security cards, Medicare, Medicaid. Here's a free cell phone. Here's some cash. and they emptied their prisons. The nations of the world emptied their prisons, dropped them off on our doorstep, and said, "Go to America. They'll give you everything."
Of course.
Yeah.
You know, we have the same thing with people crossing the English Channel. They get across, they throw their passports into the water, and of course, we can't identify who they are. We have no idea of their background. We don't know what they've done. No, I'm sure there are, I'm sure there are many of them that are genuine, trying to seek refuge. But again, they're coming from a safe country. It's the bit that concerns me is you cannot do that background check. And even if it's only 1 in 100 that have committed serious crimes in the past, that's 1 in 100 people that you're now adding to your population.
Well, yeah, and you're adding 2 million people a year. So if you do 1 in 100, that's a whole lot of people that could be causing. And the other thing, so we're talking a little bit about freedom right now, Rob. The freedom of the working man like you and I can't get those benefits.
No.
And neither can you. Absolutely not. And yet here we are funding all of this, and it's my understanding that in the last year of the Biden administration, we gave 2 million of these people Social Security numbers and an ability to vote, Medicare, and all of this stuff, and they have no stake in this nation whatsoever. We want people to come here legally, like you're going to do. We've talked about that, and there's a path for you to come here to Wyoming legally. And you can. What are you dreaming of doing in Wyoming? Let's get off topic a little bit. Let's talk. What is your dream?
The idea is to set up a kind of general handyman, general maintenance kind of company. There seems to be quite a big need here in Wyoming for such a thing. I've worked in office spaces for many years.
As I have.
You have.
Yeah.
And just getting back outside, enjoying the beautiful world. Outside in Wyoming. There's the dream, and it's having that freedom to work for yourself. You live and die by your own hard work, off your own back. And, Wyoming is just such a stunning place to go and do that.
Yeah, well, and we've learned that there are paths, several paths for you to get here and to get here legally and for you to enjoy the freedoms that we have here in Wyoming and to do it the right way. Yeah, and that's, one of the things when we're talking about freedom, you could say this, but everybody I know across the globe still wants to come to America.
Yeah.
Regardless of our condition, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, you'll even see, I think the increase now from Britain coming to America has increased significantly. And again, you can't quite say you're fleeing persecution, but it kind of feels like that at times. And it really does.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things as we wrap up this freedom thing is we're going to talk about future next, and then we're going to get into some topics that matter to all of us, right? Taxes, education, healthcare, some of those other things. What I've seen in Wyoming is that we have freedoms, but they're permission-based. And they can be changed at sort of the will and whim of whoever's in charge. And even, I'm going to bring Second Amendment rights up, which is our right to bear arms, right, Rob? Because this is something that is not familiar to you, but is familiar to our audience here in Wyoming, is that we have permission-based right to bear arms based on the Second Amendment, and then all of the rules that the state builds around that. And Rob, what I really want to see us do, if I become governor, I want to roll all this stuff back to the basics. And what do I mean by that? You get rid of these layers and layers and layers of legislation. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And go, you know what? In America, we have the Second Amendment rights. Stop. That's it. We recognize that we will get the benefits of having those rights and also possibly the side effects, right? There's going to be positives and negatives to those rights. We've gotten so much into legislating freedom that, yes, the current legislation is they're really pro Second Amendment rights. But what happens in 2 years or 5 years or 6 years when they're not so friendly and they go, well, we're going to decide to change your rights again? And that's permission-based freedom, and we want to get away from that.
I mean, you should, because your rights should be enshrined. That should be the end of it.
Yeah.
This is what America was built on.
Yeah.
I know that you guys do your amendments and that they go through a huge process whenever they come to pass. Mm-hmm. But these were done, they were established a very long time ago.
Yeah.
And the people to play around with those, to keep tweaking them, changing them. And again, some of those changes may or may not make sense.
Yeah.
But it seems too much. And we see the same thing. I mean, you'll see it across Europe, you'll see it in England, certainly.
Yeah.
where it just feels there's more and more government, there's more and more oversight, there's more and more rules, there's more and more control. And it's that control element which I think is probably the more scary thing. It seems to be relentless.
Well, and a lot of what we see going on, Rob, is we're just sort of moving pieces around, right? Instead of, so we're for this or we're against this because we're a Republican or a Democrat. And so we're going to just move this piece and put it over here instead. When what we really need to be doing is creating a solution and putting it to rest.
Well, this is my point. I don't think there should be this to and fro, this sort of yo-yoing between one side to another.
Yeah.
These are your rights.
Yeah.
And that should be a complete and utter. They shouldn't be negotiable. They shouldn't be dependent on what one side wants against the other.
Yeah.
They should be enshrined into law, sealed, and done.
And done and good to go.
Unless there is a major reason for that to be changed.
Well, and society and culture does change, Rob.
It does.
And I want to address that actually with the gun topic because I think it's a good one. When we talk about freedom, we have a couple of things. We have 3 decades of folks not being taught or trained how to use guns. They're not familiar with them. They're not having them around. We've got these gun-free zones, which are soft targets. And we've got that element, right? But then we also have this mental health element, which is massive amongst our youth and things like that. Like, I'll be honest, probably not a great idea to have a bunch of kids with rifles in the back of their trucks. Not because of the kids that have them, but because of our mental health crises that we have. Now these kids could have access to that, right? And so we do have to think about culturally, what are those boundaries? What are those, because we can't just solve mental health overnight.
No.
And the other thing I think with this issue, and we don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this issue now, but it's like, we don't value life like we used to.
No.
And this is because of video games, maybe because of movies, but also just in general, we don't value life like we used to.
No. I think we've lost that element of community.
Yeah.
I think we've lost that element of caring about one another. I think people have become, especially, you see it more and more in the younger generation, and I'm sure every generation said the same about the previous generation. But it seems to be getting more insular. I think a lot of kids now are so addicted to their phones, social media.
Yeah.
To it's about me. What can I have? What can I get? And there's no thought about what their actions do and what it results to impact other people around them.
Yeah.
And it's how do you change that?
I think, it's going to take longer than 4 years. So a governor here in Wyoming is a governor for 4 years. He could be reelected again, and then he would have to take a break, whatever, things like that. It will take longer than 4 years to undo 3 decades of really just sort of re-indoctrinating. You can't just push a button and magically just change the culture. No. It takes time and energy, and there's a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, I think, you and I went to a meal the other night, and I found out that TikTok was looking to be moving to Wyoming. Now, for me, TikTok is not just something I wouldn't want in Wyoming. I don't want it the worldwide over. It's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the leading drivers, I think, in some of this. Some
well,
of the issues that we're seeing.
And we do know that from a mental standpoint, it is hurting our youth. Mm-hmm. I know Australia passed a law that I actually agree with, which is kids under 16 can't have social media, period.
I personally don't think it goes far enough.
Yeah. When you're a grown adult, make your own decisions because it's really affecting our kids. And before we get too deep into topics, which we're doing this, but it's okay. No, we're doing it. That's what we're doing. We're shooting the breeze. Yeah. Let's talk about the future. And I think this is something that's missed a lot in politics, in decisions that are being made right now. We're not thinking a whole lot about how the future is affected by those, because we're like, well, you know what, in 2 years or 4 years in another election, it's going to be somebody else's problem. It'll be some other governor's problem or some other legislator's problem. And we're not, and you and I talked about this, especially when it comes to like green energy and things like this. It's like, these things are lies, they're facades.
They are.
And we're not thinking about how that affects the future, which is the fourth pillar of my campaign. And we do hear a lot of politicians talking about actually faith, family, and freedom, but we don't hear a lot about the future. And what does the future look like in your mind?
It's, again, we've spent a few days, we've traveled around, we've seen those huge windmills everywhere. Yeah. So what's going to happen with those windmill blades?
Yeah.
The power that's being generated in Wyoming, found out this week it's been sent straight to California.
Oh, sure.
Should they take those wind, those wind blades? I think they should.
Yeah, I think they
They're
should
getting
too.
the benefit of Wyoming wind, but why should you end up with the problem of disposing, or putting those things in landfill or but
Coal mines is what we're doing with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And these things, I'm sure if somebody did a proper breakdown of the cost of, we're talking about the oil to lubricate them, which is a hugely condensed oil thing, and the number is staggering.
Yeah.
You could probably run every car in Wyoming for what the oil requirements are for these windmills that they're building.
Oh yeah.
So you're telling me that's carbon benefit? There isn't one.
Yeah, they don't. In green energy, the idea of green energy is really great, and that's a big future topic, right? This is a huge topic for the future, which is why we're talking about it. The idea of green energy is great, but it's not there yet.
It's certainly
not. And we're destroying our planet for lithium.
Yeah.
But we don't see it here, right? Because we're deferring that to other countries.
You do, yeah.
And figuring out ways to, get all of this. And when you do the math, like you said, even a windmill or solar panels, you go, wow, these are not carbon neutral when you do the math on what it takes to produce them, maintain them, transporting them, then get rid of them. I was joking around with somebody, Eric, you're not Eric. I was talking to Eric.
You were talking to Eric. Yeah.
I was talking to Eric, and we were doing an interview at the Talk Shop up in Laramie, and I was joking with him. I said, hey, I think the only thing we can do with these things is just put them in an Elon Musk rocket and send them, way into space somewhere where they can never come back.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nowhere for them on Earth. And this is
Yeah.
what, we've known windmill technology, if you build with wood. Probably not as effective, you're not doing it was so strong. But
at least it biodegrades.
But how, this is the part of the green policy that I've never understood, and it's worldwide. We see the same craziness in England, is let's get these windmills up, because then we can turn around to the rest of the world and pretend that we are carbon neutral, or we are, but they're not looking at what's going to happen next.
In the future.
And, whether that's solar panels, which can be equally, again, these things are going to stockpile batteries. What's going to happen to all these car batteries?
The batteries are, hopefully in the next 10 years, somebody's going to come up with a brilliant idea of what to do with these batteries.
But my concern with doing things like Joe is always in that hope of,
right.
We see this the world over again. It's always, it's the solution is never in place before we put these things in place.
Yeah.
So, before you start putting in this green technology, and I appreciate you might want to play around and build some test beds and things like that, which are absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But why would you make them widespread? Why would you put so much money, government resources, because these things are always subsidized.
Oh yeah, by the way, by the taxpayers, by the working class.
Always. So they're not cost effective. They're not environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
And realistically, you could build a coal-powered nuclear, or a nuclear power plant, which would be far more productive. It's not reliant on the wind or the sun or those kind of things. You're going to create waste, same as any of these other things, but there are ways around it. Yeah,
I mean, they're working on ways to deal with the nuclear waste, obviously, across this country and around the world, because the world right now is trying to figure out what to do with nuclear waste, because that doesn't play very well into the future either.
No, it's not.
In fact, Wyoming shot down recently, just that we were, they're one of 3 locations identified where we could put the nation's nuclear waste. But at some point, we've got to address those issues, and that's why we're talking about the future. Not only the future, the future that we're going to leave, we're going to leave our kids, the future generations, and just making sure that looks really, really good. Yeah. And so in that, so those are kind of the 4 pillars of the campaign that we're talking about. Let's get into some nitty-gritty topics. Okay. One of the things I'd like to talk about first is healthcare. Okay. You and you have a very different healthcare system in the UK than we have here in the US. There are pros and cons to that, because it's universal health care, National Health Service, and things like that. We hear horror stories over here, right, of that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, for our audience, the pros and the cons? You and I have talked about this, how it used to be. Seems like everything that the government touches, it breaks.
It does.
And gives you a little insight on that.
If we were talking about incorporating the NHS as it is today into America, I would say absolutely not. It's become an absolute money pit.
Yeah.
The problem we've had now is there's so much private inside the NHS that the cost has just exploded. Everything from the way that they're managed, down to the catering, down to clean.
Yeah, we talked about this, $100 Band-Aids, right?
Well,
Things like that.
the crazy thing is, like in an NHS hospital now, you have to have somebody to come around and change the light bulb. And it's not a general maintenance guy that works in the building and he's paid all year round, £30,000 or something to go and just that's his job.
A maintenance guy.
Oh,
yeah.
no. They'll get a contractor in, pay him $6,000 or $7,000 literally to come in and change a light bulb. So now every light bulb, where that one guy could be one person with one job, could have the whole hospital for the whole year.
Yeah.
You're now paying exponentially more money simply for the same thing. And it's all the way around.
And it's because government's gotten involved.
Government's got completely involved. Mm-hmm. There's so many kickbacks now from private companies, especially medical companies.
Prescriptions, things like that.
And if you wanted to talk about what the NHS used to be, you go back to the 60s, 70s when the NHS was first proposed, when it first was created. Mm-hmm. You had doctors they ran the medical care. They determined what treatment you got, and their job was purely to heal. Right. You had nurses and matrons who would run those wards. There was never these massive long queues. There was never these massive long waits. People came in with a broken arm. They went through the ER. Boom, finished, done. They were out, then they were back out the door. You go in there today, 14, 15, 16-hour waits is not uncommon. We've got people that need old people that need hip replacements who are put on waiting lists. But they're going to pass away before the operation ever happens. Yeah. And it's not from a lack of money. The NHS now has become such a succubus for money. It's incredible. Yeah. That affects your taxes. So that too. Absolutely. And it seems to be, and I'm sure it's the same here. Every year you're paying more and getting less. Yeah. Every year. Well, it's interesting, Rob, because I think it's a lot of what we do, and the reason why I bring up medicine first is because with everything, whether it's property taxes, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, we're treating symptoms for things. Yeah. We're not treating the problem anymore. Even here in Wyoming, Rob, we have to give doctors permission to use ivermectin. Which is crazy. In other words, we had to say, well, you know what, Mr. Doctor, we've decided to give you permission to use it. Why aren't the doctors in charge of the medicine? Well, they should be. Yeah, they should be, but they're not. No, the legislature has to decide what the doctors can and cannot do. Correct. And that's going the same way as, it's just more government. There is one element to the NHS which I think America would benefit from, even in its its state of today, is at least with the NHS we buy prescription drugs. Really? In massive bulk. Yeah. Which means, the NHS can go to Pfizer or, whoever that might be and say, we'll pay this, or we'll go to a competitor. Whereas I'm not quite sure exactly how the American system works, but it's probably a case of you could be in one state and pay $100 for a tablet. Yeah. Somewhere else it could be $50. Yeah, well, I told you there's a lot of stuff where, you got a $2 tablet and they're going to charge the insurance $2,000 for that tablet. Exactly. And that's sort of unfortunate. But I think there's a lot of discussion about this. I think the way you fix a lot of this is you get rid of the payouts, right? But not only that, you give the power back to the leading medical professionals to do the job. Just like you do with educators, just like you do with local folks, is you give the power back to the experts, to the people, instead of legislating them to death. This is one of the things, Rob, that I think is really important to me as I'm kind of running, is you look at a teacher or a nurse, and you look at the burden that we've put around them. Where we've created this massive legislative burden around an educator, or by the way, we're getting rid of the Department of Education for the most part in the US, which is going to be great, but we still have local issues to deal with. But we've created this burden for these people, and we need to unwind this. Can I ask a question? Yeah. We've seen this in the UK where an awful lot of educators quit the industry. Yeah. Because they weren't getting to teach what they wanted to teach. Yeah. They were being dictated certain subjects which, to be honest, they didn't really feel comfortable talking about, discussing. They went against their belief systems, all these kind of things. And I'm not sure if that is the same in America. I don't know whether you've seen. Well, yeah, glad you brought that up, because education is something we're going to talk about. We'll just go into it now. Is what we've done. We've just gotten away from teaching kids reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? Yeah. And we're teaching them all this other stuff. You and I talked about this, education things that just don't matter. No.
You know, it's just kind of like, wow, you know, why does, you know, the mechanic, or let's see, what were some of the examples we were talking about?
You've got, you know, people that want to work in a technical field, the STEMs.
Right.
So, you know, you've got your STEM fields, which, you know, again, dictate your schooling around that.
Yeah.
But your mathematics, you know, your sciences, you know, your histories, geographies, important core subjects.
Yeah.
That, for me, is what somebody should be paid to educate.
Well, and why are they spending half of their educational career learning about some obscure, you know, piece of literature, or, and not to say that those things are bad, but they're spending an enormous, they want to be.
Well, I'll ask you a question.
Yeah.
How many of the things were you taught at school that you use in your day-to-day?
Let's see, you know, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, obviously in like reading and writing, right? But gosh, you don't use any, most of us, not, I mean, obviously our doctors, our lawyers, our, you know, some of our professional white collar type services, they use some more of those skills, but most of us don't.
So of course, you know, if you want to go into a medicine field, those things are important, but you go to college for that.
Yeah.
Is it important that a child who is 16, 17 understands photosynthesis if he's never going to go into a field such that? Now, there is a slight debate whether you look at it and say, well, actually, by learning around it, maybe that generates that interest. So which is fine, but it seems to be more and more children are forced to learn subjects or take classes which they have no interest in. You know, it doesn't suit them. But, you know, it's not all children are the same.
Yeah, interest-based learning.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's good.
You'll have children who are book smart, bang, 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 and they absolutely adore that stuff.
Yeah.
You'll have other children who all they want to do is build, create, make things. And if those children want to do those things, encourage it. Yeah. You know, why does education have to be so layered? You know, it has to be so that you have to do this, have to do that, have to do that. Even when you know a child is not only suited to it, but it can actually demotivate that child as well. Where education, I think there's a certain point where you teach arithmetic, you teach you know how to read and write, and then you look at that child and look at what they're interested in. You know, understand education should be looking at their kids and saying, this one here, brilliant, he's going to be a doctor. You know, he's got that thing, or there's your future engineer. There, you know, all those kind of things. And you start to build, and then you push those children in that direction. Yeah. I think we all know it. It's just really a matter of figuring out how you get it done. You know, it's like putting the kid on the soccer field, or what would you call it? Not soccer. Proper football. I actually agree with him. I think we should call soccer football. But you know, You're gonna get unpopular.
Oh, I know. But I think we should, because you use your foot. And
absolutely.
Yeah, here I am in my socks, by the way. I just realized that, but that's okay. I'm in my kitchen. I'm in my kitchen studio, so it's okay to be in my socks, right? They don't even match right now. That's kind of embarrassing. I can't believe that. My wife, actually, she's sitting behind the camera and she's giving me a face. She's really worried about me saying that. But you know, we gotta have a little fun here too, right, Rob?
Absolutely.
Speaking of fun, let's throw a couple of pieces of wood, because we're having a fireside chat and our fire is going out, and we gotta keep the fire going. So we'll throw some more fire wood on there. Hi. Wow. Yeah. You want to say hi? No. Okay. Well. Anyway, so we're talking a little bit about anyway, soccer analogy. Let's get back to what we were talking about. It's like putting that kid that likes to play that defense position, and you go ahead and just put him in a forward just because. Yeah. It's the same thing with education. It's like my son, for instance, super great at like fixing things and building things and like figuring things out. Not so super, you know, great or leaning towards literature and reading things like that. My daughter, on the other hand, well, she really likes that stuff. She's a good reader. She doesn't love the math, but my son loves the math. He does the math. And so just helping, you know, for the future, just figuring out a way that we can allow kids to be doing interest-based learning, I think is just so
I agree, important. And I think it's also, and you see it certainly more in colleges, I think, but when you've got sort of kids are now being forced as part of their, you know, their degrees or whatever your equivalent of the same sort of thing, I guess. Right? So, you know, they're learning law. So why are they also having to take classes in social sciences and, you know, other elements which have absolutely nothing to do with the law, which is what they're paying to study? Yeah. You know, it seems to be where's the value coming from that? You know, I'm sorry, they're young adults.
I think the value. I think what's done over there in those non-relevant subjects is the indoctrination.
Yeah, there's certainly no.
Or just sort of just the distraction to keep people from focusing on what they want to do or what they want. You get a lot of kids in the U.S. where they end up being career college students because they can't figure out what they like. Yeah. Because they get so many pieces of so many different things, and they can't figure out what direction they want to go.
I mean, again, you know, you go to England, you've got children, sorry, kids, adults, I suppose that you would call them, right? You know, but they're going to, you know, they're studying a degree in, you know, the art history.
Yeah.
What on earth? You know, realistically, what are you going to do with such a degree?
Yeah.
What benefit is?
Well, you can be a politician.
Well,
a career politician, which is, of course, a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. But you know, so career politicians is something we do very well in the UK. But no, it does seem to be, you know, these kids. There's too many kids going to uni, go to college. In your case, you know, it's they're studying things that don't matter. That have no real
real value.
You know, for me, the people that you want going to, you know, university are your doctors, your lawyers, your vets, engineers, IT guys. You know, people that actually require that deeper level of education.
Well, and why not just prepare 80% of the kids when they're out of that secondary school, as you would call it, or we call it high school, that they're ready for the workforce.
Well, they should be.
We should be able to do that, but we can't do that because, I mean, we got 20% of our kids that don't even graduate. Yeah. And by the way, in Wyoming, only like 47-ish% of our kids can even read at grade level.
Which is terrifying. Then they're probably.
Oh, by the way, that's like the highest in the nation right now. Which is.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Sorry, America.
Yeah.
But again, you know, that tells me that they're spending far too much time on other things apart from learning to read.
Reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're spending all their time on social studies and rewritten history. You know, and not just learning what happened in history and moving on from it.
I mean, I think that's a scary thing now, is that so many of the topics have become off the books. Well, you know, you can't talk about these things anymore because it doesn't put us in a good light. Or history is history. Yeah. Good and bad. Yeah. Children should be taught both. Yeah. The good and bad history because, you know, the famous saying, if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it. You know, for me, it's one of the core subjects that all children should learn. Yeah. It's beyond that, again. Yeah, why are we doing it when it's not of value? No. Yeah, I agree. Education is always a hot topic with politics. And I feel like we always, instead of coming up with solutions for our education system, we're using kids as pawns. And we just keep doing it and doing it. And by the way, my own party, the Republican Party, we're guilty of doing it too. Just in different ways. Yeah. Now, America came up with Common Core, which was something that basically said that if you can make a good argument that 2 + 2 = 5, then it equals 5 because you've made a good argument for it. Well, and we've created, and so we've allowed education to do that now. Department of Education going away. I know our lead educators in the state are really excited about having more local control on education doing that. So we'll be interested to see where that goes on. But let's move on to into some other like things. What do you want to talk about next, Rob? Why don't you pick? Ooh, let's think. I put him on the spot here. He did. No preparation. No preparation. This is all off the cuff. It's totally raw. And so here we are. What do you want to talk about next? I mean, obviously we talked around the rest, the future, and I think the big thing for me, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's around the energy sector. So. Oh yeah. Okay. Let's talk about energy. So, yeah. I know that there's talk of nuclear coming here. Yep. There's talk of, we've seen the issue with the windmills. How would you, as governor, make those changes? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I thought you never asked. So energy. Well, energy is a big thing, Rob, for me, because as governor, energy, as we were talking earlier this week, affects the cost of the camera we're using, of the lights that we have here, the microphones. It affects the food that we're going to eat. Let's see, I see my wife's over there. She's got spaghetti and meatballs, so I guess that's what we're having for dinner. She is teasing us with food we're going to eat after this show. But she's teasing us, and it looks like it's really tasty. It's quite good. Energy affects absolutely
everything that we buy, that we consume, that we purchase, whether it's our heater, whether it's our electricity. I mean, it's just literally everything.
We touched on obviously the cost of fuel. You know,
Yeah.
gasoline, as you guys call it. You know, but for me, it's kind of, you know, we've talked about this before, where from everything, from the cost of the farmer running his tractor to transportation of food, every last thing is determined by that cost of diesel.
Yeah, so what would I do as governor for energy? Well, one of the things that's happening right now in America, Rob, you may or may not know this, is obviously we have President Trump, which you do know.
Yes, absolutely.
He is opening up, you know, the faucet, so to speak, of coal and oil. And the beautiful thing is that we have clean, green energy for coal and oil. We have all this stuff. Now, this whole carbon capture boondoggle, you and I were talking about this, just plant trees, you know, to capture, to capture
nature created the solution many millennia ago.
Nature has created the filter for CO2. If we're concerned about it, let's plant more trees. For me, I'm not a green energy guy. I think green energy, Rob, has not gotten where it needs to be efficient.
No.
And so I would side with Chuck Gray, as if any of you are watching this and you saw the recent vote with the governor and other leaders of our state, Chuck Gray was the only one that said no more windmills.
Good.
Okay? And I would be with him. Now, right now, our current governor said, "Oh yeah, let's get more windmills going in Wyoming." I would not. I think that green energy could get to a point where I can be optimistic that it would be actually green, and it would be good for. But we're not there yet.
No, I mean we can debate all that in your life. And be the only one that's ever going to do that is fission.
Yeah.
So, once you've broken nuclear fission, then you have your source of energy. But
we're not there yet.
But there doesn't seem to be enough funding going into it.
There's
a lot of private research going into this.
Well, we're putting an awful lot of money in Wyoming into windmills.
Of course.
And by the way, into carbon capture.
Okay.
Where we're going to suck carbon out of the atmosphere and stick it in the earth.
So,
I mean, what could go wrong there?
No, of course. So we'll use energy, which is created, let's be honest, by less than green methods to capture carbon. Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
And you know, we have clean coal. So I think for me, it's about getting energy costs down. Natural gas, power. You know, a lot of people in Wyoming have mixed feelings about nuclear, but you know, we've got Generation 2 nuclear and things like this starting to come online. There's less waste, and we're even talking about ways to use the waste, and then we have no waste nuclear energy. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
So I think we can get there, but energy will bring the cost of everything down, and that'll apply to housing, to property taxes. I mean, the cost to build a house right now, but that all that underlying, of course, is energy. You know, the Biden administration, the minute they got in, they started cutting land leases in Wyoming. We lost like 700 natural gas wells. What did that do to the cost of natural gas, you think? Purposefully, during COVID, they artificially raised the cost of energy by shutting energy down.
Yeah.
And by the way, natural gas, is that clean? I don't think it gets any cleaner than natural gas.
Not much.
You know, it's so fostering that, but also finding a bridge, I think, Rob, to what does energy of the future look like? Because we just, like you said, we're just not there yet. We're so far away, and right now, we're going to build more windmills in Wyoming, and that's not the right answer.
It feels to me that if all the money's being pumped into superficial solutions,
yes,
you know, the ones that make us look good, you know, so that we can say that
we feel good.
America's low or Britain's low.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, let's be honest, they don't mind that there are small children mining cobalt in Africa. You know,
yeah.
And yet, here we are.
At what expense?
And, you know, but you'll have somebody that can virtual signal that, you know, I've got my, my electric car and I can get all this. There's no understanding of what the damage has been done outside of your little bubble.
Yeah.
And again, if the money instead was pumped into things like fission or reusing.
Well, we're talking, I think we get to the bottom of it, Rob. It's talking about actual solution.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's really what for me personally, which is kind of inspired my run for governor, Rob, is let's stop putting Band-Aids on everything. Let's come up with actual solutions for education. Let's give teachers back to power. let's give medicine back the power to practice medicine. Instead of having government involved at so many levels and things like that. Let's talk about property taxes. Let's talk about property taxes. Tell me about what your taxes in the UK. Let's get on the topic of taxes. By the way, Wyoming, for those of you that are watching, we have so much to be thankful for.
Oh, you do.
You know, first of all, we have some of the lowest tax rates in the nation to start.
Yeah.
But when you look at the world, and Rob's going to share a little bit about this, we are so blessed in Wyoming, even with our higher property taxes, maybe some of the taxes that are making us a little bit more uncomfortable in Wyoming. We have so much to be thankful for, Rob. We really do. So why don't you share a little bit about taxes in the UK, in Europe, and then I'll talk a little bit about what my tax, you can ask me a little bit about what my tax policies be like.
Yeah, I mean, again, well, where to start? I mean, we'll go back to fuel. So I come to Wyoming to come and visit you, you and your family, and I go with you to a gas station, and you fill up your car, and you're paying for a gallon what I was paying for a litre not that long ago.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
And nearly all of that's taxed. My house, council tax, which I suppose is very similar to your property tax in many ways, is structured differently. But this is supposed to be simply to remove your bin waste and things like this. But, again, that's escalated and it's spiraled. In England, particularly because of, we're talking about why do we have a massive cost of living, crisis.
Yeah.
And I don't know how bad it was here in America. I wasn't here for it. But
well, people in Wyoming are feeling the cost of living a little bit in a lot of different ways. It's not just related to tax. I mean, general things have gone up a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, in England, for example, I used to be able to buy my grocery shop for maybe £80 a week, something like that, which $100-ish roughly.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as the cost of living crisis came in, that doubled.
Yeah.
My mortgage doubled. Everything doubled, and it's just the fact that we are taxed at every level on every last thing. I don't think you guys realise, simply to park your car in a town, we are charged an extortionate amount, by the way, to park our cars in our town centres. So what's happened to our town centres? They're becoming ghost towns. Yeah. Every single shop now, I mean, there's a street where I come from, where my parents live in West Supermare, where it's just boarded up, because no business can afford the local tax rates for staff, business rates.
Yeah.
The council, they've now increased the national insurance, which is what we use to pay for your healthcare and your pension.
Mm-hmm.
So of course that's now gone up. So for employers, they're now paying a lot more, and now it's made the ability to hire people almost impossible. So jobs are going. It seems we're getting attacked at every level, from every direction, and honestly, it feels like you've got 1,000 hands in your pocket at all times.
Yeah.
And I cannot, I think we had this discussion a little while ago where I'm pretty sure 80 pence on the pound is disappearing in tax in one form or another, whether that's, like I said, from the farmer producing the food.
Well, heck, you're paying a TV tax every year.
Tax,
We don't have to pay that.
Absolutely. But it's absolutely crazy now.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the parking, Rob, because even here in downtown Cheyenne, just a couple of weeks ago, City Council is trying to charge people for parking.
Do not.
Yeah.
If you care about your town centres, do not allow that to ever happen.
It's $2, right?
Yeah.
But then it's $6, then it's $12, then it's $25 to park your car.
Of course.
And like you said, the people, okay, I'm not going downtown anymore. Why would I do that? I got to pay for parking.
I think this is the scary thing. You've got to support your local businesses, right?
Yeah.
If you've got a shop in town, I know it's so easy to go onto Amazon. It's so easy, to buy whatever it is you want to go online.
And get it delivered tomorrow to our doorstep.
These guys who are creating these shops, creating jobs in your town centres, have a hard enough time as it is.
Yeah.
To then throw parking on top of that, where it's just a deterrent. Why do that when you can go to a big shopping mall somewhere where you can park for free?
Yeah.
Or like you say, just order it online.
Yeah.
And you do not want, honestly, if you guys want to see how bad it gets, come for a holiday to England. I'll apologise in advance for when you get there.
Yeah.
But
nickel and dime to death, right?
Genuinely spend a bit of time talking to English people about this, because you guys are heading down this path.
We are. We're one election away from complete tyranny. I mean, you and I talked about that when we went and saw Colonel Allen West in Laramie last week. We talked about how we're one election away.
Wow.
You know, and it's kind of scary, I think, for people in Wyoming, but people in the nation, kind of knowing that, hey, we're one election away from potentially, experiencing a lot of this.
Oh, you were so close.
Yeah.
Honestly, had Trump not have won this election, I think you would have probably never seen another fair election again.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
I think there's been this movement, and at some point it's just lost any sense of common sense.
Yeah.
And it was running wild. I mean, there was a lady, sorry if you're watching, apologize if I cannot remember your name, I'm terrible with names, but she brought up a phenomenally important part when we were chatting, and it was around about schools and about who was getting on those boards.
Oh, yeah.
And
here in Wyoming.
There seems to be people that state that they're Republican, and yet they seem to be very Democrat, left-leaning.
Yep.
And it's not for me to say what the people of America should do, but if I was in Wyoming and I was a genuine Republican person who wanted to see some common sense back in our schools, run for those positions. Don't care about winning. Grab your friends, people that you also know that are of like mind, with common sense, with sensibility, and just run, bombard it. If there's 10 positions on that board, you grab 100, 200 people to run.
And just make it happen.
Make it happen.
Well, that's what Colonel Allen West.
Absolutely. You don't understand. The left is organized, massively organized, and they are 20, 30, 40 years with a plan ahead. Yeah. And
it does feel a little bit like conservatives don't have a super long-term plan in a lot of ways. And I'm talking to my own party.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I'm being hard on myself, my own party. It's like you said, they've got a plan.
And the scary thing is, it seems to be whether you're Australian, British, Canadian, American, that left seems to have the same message. It seems to come out at the same time. It seems to be coordinated, structured, planned, funded from somewhere. And don't ask me
why. Well, and right now in Wyoming, even our Republican parties are fighting like cats and dogs. We're not all seeing eye to eye on things. No. We got to figure out a way to lead that and sort that out so we can start moving forward and unwinding some of this.
Well, it's so cool. I mean, again, you can go through so many aspects of everything in the nation, whether it's your judges, look at those people. How have they adjudicated those particular decisions? There are so many things which they should be red flags to people, which is kind of and one of the things that you guys have, and honestly, if this could ever make it to Britain, would be amazing, is also what's going on with the great work with those, which I think is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And every single time I watch what you guys are doing, it just makes me feel sick that this is not happening in England.
Well, a lot of us go to the polls, Rob, and we don't know these justices that are on the ballot, right? I go, well, that name sounds nice. Yeah. Justice Joseph Kibler. That sounds nice. I'm going to go ahead and circle his name. He's got an R there. I have no idea what he stands for. And we need to know. And we need to educate. And that's part of getting the word out, too. You got 100 people running for a school board or whatever. Hey, someone's going to be out there telling the truth. Hey, this person.
But again, I think that falls upon people like, not yourself, but a little bit yourself. But again, people like-minded. Yeah. Who, let's find out who these people are. Let's call this stuff out. If I've got somebody that's running for a Republican judge, and yet I can then point to 20 things that they've done in the last 2 years, which shows that anything but. Yeah. Put up a billboard. Yeah. Post it. Get it on Facebook. Get it on social media.
You've known me for 22 years. Am I a Democrat?
I am certainly not. No more so than I would be if I lived here.
Yeah.
No.
I think you know that I'm a cookie and milk guy, and I don't have a liberal bone in my body.
No, sir.
Yeah. So we're talking a hot topic here in Wyoming right now, Rob, is property taxes.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about this. How I think we were driving back from Allen West. We were talking about how we don't really ever own
your own property.
It's a facade.
Yeah.
Because you're always paying someone for it.
Of course.
Even if I paid off my mortgage tomorrow, guess what's not going away?
No.
My property taxes.
No, sir.
You know, and by the way, I might own this structure, right? I might own the garden out there that's on top of the dirt. I don't own anything under the dirt.
No, sir. No.
But that guy, whoever owns that stuff under the dirt, he's not paying taxes on that.
No, exactly.
No, I am.
But you find any particular mineral wealth, you'll certainly own it then.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. We know there's oil under here where I live. You know, there's oil under here, fracking and whatnot, things like that. You know, my goal for Wyoming would be, and we talked about freedom. We're going to start giving people real freedom. You know what? A guy ought to own the stuff on top of his land. He ought to own the land, and he ought to own what's under the land. And you know what? If someone wants to buy what's under the land from him, they can do that.
Yeah.
But that's his. And that's true property ownership. And by the way, you can't get rid of property taxes overnight. But what you can do is make a plan to get rid of property taxes. There's other ways to create revenue. We talked a lot about more consumption-based type of taxing. Or we talked about, we have energy, tourism in Wyoming. Two huge, those are our primary, by the way, money producers. Why not expand those industries and truly give the people of Wyoming their property?
Yeah.
You own that outright. You paid your mortgage. That is yours. Oh, and by the way, when you hand it to your kids, I got 3 young kids, you have kids. When I hand it to my kids, the government doesn't take 50% of that away from them.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
I was literally just about to do this.
Yeah, so go ahead, yeah.
No, I was literally about to break up that exact same point. Because how is it, you paid all that tax for your whole life, you bought that property, you paid your mortgage, you've done all those things. Why does the government have any right to take 30, 40, 50, whatever that percentage number is? That should go to your children. You're supposed to be, as a parent, building a life for your kids to give them something that, maybe you didn't have as a child yourself.
Yeah.
Is that not the whole point of America?
Yeah.
Is to build that generational wealth and to make sure that you're building something for the future.
The government takes our generational wealth, Rob. But you know why? Because if you keep people from having generational wealth, you can control them. You can dangle the benefits before them. You can do all that, and they don't get. It's slavery, but just in a different way.
Ooh, now we're talking about
right?
state dependence, and
right.
Yeah.
It's slavery, but just a different way. Because the government says, well, Joseph died, and he's now leaving, or Joseph and his wife died, or whatever. He's now leaving that property to his kids. Well, his property's worth X amount of dollars. Yep. Let's just pick a number. I'm just going to say my property's not worth as much, by the way, people, so don't get the wrong idea. Let's say it's worth $2.5 million. The government's going to go, well, you got to pay taxes on that. And my kids go,
they can't afford that.
We can't afford that. They got to pay whatever it is, $500,000. So guess what they do? They lose the property. They have to sell it.
Yeah, and we're seeing exactly this problem in the UK now.
Yeah.
Where they decided that they're going to do the same to farmers.
Yeah.
So of course our small farmers, particularly, they might have a property which on paper is worth millions of pounds because it's got all this land.
Mm-hmm.
But that farm, which has probably been through 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 generations. These guys now they're not making money. If they're a dairy farm, they are literally, they are paycheck to paycheck almost. Yeah. They love what they do. Mm-hmm. But what happens when they then, they pass away and their son inherits it, and because their land is worth £20 million, they then say, well, you now need to give us £2 or £3 million in, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And there's no way these guys have that money. So what happens? They're forced to sell.
And the Bill Gates of the world buy it.
Of course.
Right? So it becomes a corporate farm.
Of course.
Because they buy it up because the family can't keep it.
Yep.
And that, by the way, that's the same thing here in America. Yeah. And so then what do you lose? What do you lose with that?
You lose individual cow herds. So you might have specific breeds which actually may not yield as much, but there's specific local reason for keeping them. You'll have crops, which, there might well be different.
Well, you talked about monoculture.
Monoculture,
yeah.
Which is even worse.
Where the corporation takes that property because they can buy it, and they turn it into a monoculture land.
Well, it's something, I hope one day America gets better and more aware of is soil health.
Yeah.
So the biggest problem with monoculture is the fact that you'll end up with soil deterioration, you end up with desertification, which is one, it's happening now all over the world. And
You can let her in. She can visit for the video.
Yeah.
We're gonna let one of our Colorado mountain dogs in to visit for the video.
Marlo.
Yeah, she come in and say hi.
But,
Come here, Marlo. You want to say hi? Hi. Hi, this is Marlo, everybody. One of the pups of the farm. She's very, very sweet. She likes belly rubs. You won't be able to see her if she wants belly rubs in the video. Can you see that dog in the video? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. Marlo's saying hi. She's a real sweet dog. Yeah. You're gonna get one of these from us when you move here. Yeah. One of these puppy dogs.
Absolutely.
You know, it's interesting. You know, we know this in America. You know that we've destroyed our soil. You know, and we got to work on fixing that. Well, RFK, you know, is going to work on that now that he's in charge of a lot of that. You know, hopefully we'll be working on something.
But I think that it has to happen, and I think it's absolutely, you know, again, you start taking away the things, you take away different breeds, you take away different ways of farming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the fact that we do crop rotations, all that kind of thing in the UK, you take that away.
Oh yeah.
And then you've got these guys. But let's be honest, you see the same seeds in the UK. Your food has the nutrition. You know, and you get a tomato which is grown organically.
Yeah.
You get one that's grown mass produced on a monoculture type farm, and you look at the nutrient value in those two.
But
the one that there's nothing. You know, it's literally junk.
Yeah.
And you take the junk that's in that. What happens? You're not getting the vitamins out of the food. You're not getting the minerals that your body, you know.
Yeah.
So of course, what's the solution to that, Joe? Is you then need to give people vitamin tablets. Or, you know, they start having problems with bone issues. So of course you've got to medicate them that way. So then you end up with all these people getting sick who need to be medicated simply because they're not getting the nutrition out of their food.
Well, we know the two biggest profit centers in the world are war and bad health, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know,
and you cannot tell me that this isn't
done by design.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Bill Gates said many years ago from a podium that his goal was going to be to reduce the world population by 10 to 15%. And of course, we are seeing a lot of that, you know, play out with the COVID vaccines and problems that people have problems with, you know, things like that. And you know, we've got national spokespeople who have come on camera now saying, "Wow, that's the biggest regret I ever had that they have, you know, diseases and stuff now because of it." But I digress. We're getting completely sidetracked. You know, let's see what else. You know, we've talked about education, we've talked about tax, and I've talked about what we want to do on property, you know, stuff like that. We've talked about energy. You know, I think I want to. Any other topics you want to talk about before we wrap this up? I can't believe this. We've been at this for an hour already, Rob. We could talk all day. We could bore the internet with this for the next 2 hours if we wanted to, but we're not going to do that. Charity, do you have anything you want us to talk about? My wife, she's sitting here nice and quietly. She's drinking with her spaghetti. I think it's a kind of a strange combination, but you know, it's kind of funny. Do you have anything you want to ask us? Want us to talk about? I'll give you a second to think about that and throw a question out for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you, Rob? Anything else?
No, I think to be fair, we've gone over quite. I mean, to be fair, there probably is, but I know.
Well, I mean, it's deep. I mean, it's vast. The things that we could talk about. Oh, my wife's raising her hand. She's got a question for us.
So I loved your thoughts about tourism and using natural resources. How are you going to balance doing that and protecting these multi-generational ranchers who are very much like your farmers in the UK, who have built something and want to protect it? And tourism can often be the enemy of something like that. So, you know, how are you going to accomplish both of those things?
Oh, I think that's a great question. You know, most of our tourism infrastructure is state or federally owned land, right? So it sometimes it is land which is leased to ranchers, right, to run their cattle and things like that. I think protecting the core of Wyoming, what you're talking about, the ranchers and the farmers, it starts with some of this tax stuff that we're talking about. It starts with the energy stuff, and the reason for that is because these ranchers are having to. These people who are inheriting these ranches who would probably love to keep them cannot keep them or afford to keep them. This is issues at the federal level. Stuff like death tax, capital gains, a lot of this stuff has just got to go away. Capital gains is an interesting animal, and that's for another day to talk about. But I think at some point you tax capital gains, but not from the family trying to keep their.
I think capital gains is more from a short-term investment, things like that, not something that's
Well, I mean,
generational or wealth.
just to give you an example, we sold, yes, you know, we recently sold a home in California, and my family, we're by no means, you know, millionaires or anything like that. We're like most of the folks in Wyoming. I have a fixed salary that I make every month.
Yeah.
We live on that salary. We die by that salary. And our taxes on that sale was over $30,000 because we hadn't lived there for so long, and so we had to pay a capital gains on that. And you look at that and go, what could my wife, my 3 little kids that we homeschool have done with $30,000 in our pocket on our ranch?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you know, maybe we could have built a couple of structures for boarding horses, or put some more watering things out here so we could grow and bring value to our community.
You know,
But
we've talked about, you know, if you talk a little bit green initiative, plant some trees.
Plant some trees.
You know,
Which I would do, by the way. All of us in Wyoming would love more trees, right? So we'll plant more trees. So what could my family have done with that?
Untold, yeah.
You know, my wife's car maybe getting on its last leg here. Oh, well, we could have.
Yeah.
We could have.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Supporting local economy. We could afford that $30,000 in a new vehicle for my wife, and support the local economy with that money. But instead, the government says, "Well, no, I want that for my my agenda down in, you know, my whatever it is I'm spending money on, you know, around the world that has no value to me."
And I think that's the other thing. Well, okay, we could go into this now very deeply.
Oh yeah.
You're talking about government spending. I know the Dodge
Dodge is doing that. Yeah.
It's doing an amazing job of that.
Yeah.
But you look at it at the state level, or the national level, and the waste is monstrous.
Oh yeah.
The things that are being funded, and you know, let's hope that these guys really crack down on this, because I don't think, and I know it's no different in the UK. If we had the same scrutiny placed on what we're spending money on, it would be no different. It probably wouldn't.
Well, I mean, apparently we have things like, you know, we're spending, you know, we're paying millions of people Social Security benefits.
Yeah.
Who never paid a lick of Social Security in their lives.
No.
You know, we're giving people all these medical benefits that people, working people like my wife and I can't even get.
No.
You know, we're funding Sesame Street in Pakistan for some reason. You know,
Yeah. I know.
It's just like this open checkbook.
I mean, it's a staggering thing that people weren't even checking this stuff. And again, I know it's the same.
Yeah.
You know, where was that money going? My hope is that it does start to lead to people getting arrested.
Well, people need to go to jail. There's been treason. But the beautiful thing about it too, Rob, is that they clean up Social Security. One of the things that Elon has said, guess what? Social Security is now stable.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, we can give all these people on Social Security a raise.
Yeah.
So you got rid of all this waste.
Now,
and I'm talking
we can actually start
billions of dollars, and Trump and Elon, all these people have said, guess what happens when the waste goes away? Back to the people.
Yeah.
It goes back to the people.
I mean, I think Social Security is an interesting, I mean, it's very similar to state benefits we have in the UK.
Yeah.
But it's whether there has to be some mechanism where you get people back into work. But I think some of these things, you're better off creating jobs, perhaps.
I was just taking yourself some water.
I'm good, sir. You know, but you're better off creating jobs and, you know, opportunities for people than you are paying them to sit at home on the, you know, in the British word, on the backsides. You know, but it's kind of, you know, and that seems to be too prevalent. Benefits, you know, these things, they're great, but they should only ever be a short-term solution, not a long-term.
Well, they were designed, let's say, if I am out working and I break my legs, right? Or they were designed to be for someone with a legitimate crisis, right? Here I've got a family and something happens to me, I get hurt in a car accident, something like that. Or, you know, maybe for some reason I work with my hands, right? Well, most of us do.
Yeah.
Maybe for some reason I can't look at a computer screen anymore, you know, and I can't do my work.
And I think, you know, as any nation with a, you know, should look after its, you know, look after people when they're in need.
Yeah,
I mean, 100%. But I think there's been this ever increasing thing that there are people that are literally leaving school age or whatever. They go onto the benefit system who never come off them.
Yeah.
You know,
in Wyoming, you're actually required to do a certain amount of looking for work and working and stuff. So we don't have quite the issue with benefit abuse in Wyoming. I'm sure there is benefit abuse in Wyoming, but you go to states just south of us, for instance, like Colorado, you probably have millions of people on benefits, you know, who are just The open system.
They are. I mean, the UK. Oof.
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if some of those Venezuelan gang members that were terrorizing apartments down in Aurora, Colorado, are on government benefits.
Oh, they will be.
Probably.
Oh, I guarantee they will be.
Yeah, and you got the mayor down there and the governor telling Trump, no, you can't come take these guys out of our state.
No, we want foreign terrorists.
Yeah. I like it. I think because chaos allows control.
Of course.
So if you keep things chaotic, it allows you to stay in control.
Yeah.
And we want to give this control back to the people. I mean, that's why I'm running for governor. We want to give this control back. Now, I have limited power as governor. You got to get a legislature that supports that. You got to get justices that go, yeah, you know what, we're going to give this back to the people.
You need sheriffs who will come in and correct these problems.
Yeah, and we talked to a guy, the issue with the sheriff currently in Laramie, and we talked to a guy who's running. In fact, he emailed me today, and we're going to get together. We're going to talk.
Awesome. And I think that could be really positive. It has to be everything coming together.
Yeah.
And you've got to decide, you know what, this is what America is, this is where we want it to be, and it's what it should be.
Well, and if you look at the Constitution,
yeah.
And if we could get back to the basics, I was just talking to somebody online about this today. If you could just get back to the basics, Rob, we've added so many layers to the basics that we can't even see the sun.
Yeah.
Because we've just put, on top of the Second Amendment, we've done this.
Yeah.
On top of the First Amendment, we've done, on top of it, on top of property rights, we've just piled it on and on and on and on. And the average guy like you and I, we can't see the light of day, and neither can our kids unless we do something about it.
You know, I'm sure that every single person in America and in England, same thing, we probably break about 100 laws a day without realizing it.
Oh, yeah.
Because those laws are so convoluted, so complex, so, often unrelated to what what it was designed to do.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, go back to basics. Let's make it so everyone can fundamentally understand the law. You can do this, you can't do that, done.
I like that, back to basics. I think that is a good note to end on with this sort of interview kind of thing. It's just us hanging out as friends and brothers.
Absolutely.
Brothers from another mother, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Is back to basics. You want to say something? Do you have something you'd like to say?
I shouldn't.
You shouldn't say it. You should say it because now I put you on the spot. Oh no.
No, we've lost.
Maybe we shouldn't let her say it. I don't know. What's she gonna say?
I knew this is coming back to mothers.
Oh, you knew it was coming back to mothers? Hey, we said we were gonna do maybe we were gonna do something.
No.
You know what, Terry, they've heard your voice. You're gonna at least need to come right here and say hi to everybody.
But first you should do a shout out to your moms because they're watching.
Oh, okay. You want to shout out to your mom?
Hi, Mom.
All right. Hi, Mom. I'm sure you're probably watching on YouTube because I know you follow me. So hopefully you're watching this. I'll be shouting out to your moms. My lovely wife, Charity. They've heard your voice. They're going to have to see your face at some point. She's hanging out here supporting us.
Absolutely.
So, sit right there. They can't see you. They can't see you. There you go. All right. Here's my wife, Charity, future First Lady of Wyoming. Okay, there you go. She just took a deep breath. Great to have you here. You can go now if you'd like to. Yeah, now I put you on the spot. She did so well being put on the spot. So back to basics, you guys. I think that's the root. Part of the root, I think, of my campaign for governor is really back to basics. You agree with back to basics, wifey?
I love it.
Do you think that's a good thing? Back to
I
basics.
should probably say, Mum, now I've done this interview, I am flying back on Tuesday. So if you don't hear from your son by Wednesday,
you might want to be looking for. Okay, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate that. What I'm going to do is, can you press the stop button on the somewhere? Is there a stop button somewhere there where you stop going live? Do you see anything? It might be on the phone. You might actually have to stop the live stream on the phone. Thank you all for watching. If anyone has interacted with this video, we do appreciate you watching, and I will respond to your comments and questions after. Oh, by the way, Joseph, the number 4, WY.com, Joseph, the number 4, WY.com is how you get a hold of me. You can email me, you can text me, you can send me a carrier pigeon message if you want to.
Yeah.
You can, I want to hear from you, Wyoming, so feel free to reach out. My wife, my wonderful wife in the studio here in the kitchen, she's going to figure, we're going to go ahead and stop the go live here somehow, some way. Here you go. Do you see a button that says say goodbye to everybody. I'm going to press that end stream button now. Rob, thank you for joining me. Say goodbye to Wyoming.
Bye, Wyoming.
You're going to be here soon, so
Only for now. I should be back.
you'll be back, and looking forward to having you here in the great state of Wyoming, Rob. And with that lovely face and smile right there, I'm going to go ahead and let Rob end the stream. I'm going to press that button. You guys have a good night.
Good night, everyone.